James Harden might be going for a long time after being arrested in Houston, with a weapon found in his car. The mugshot, the court date, and the headlines have reignited questions about his future. Stay watching to hear what really happened during that 3 a.m. stop. James Harden was arrested at 3:41 a.m. on a Saturday in Houston. Not at a party, not in some blaze of glory confrontation, just a traffic stop. Quiet, routine, the kind that happens 1,000 times a night. In any major American city, except this one ended with one of the most recognizable faces in basketball getting put in handcuffs. Before the sun came up, Harden was driving in a group of cars when one of the other vehicles was pulled over by Houston police. Harden pulled up behind them, and while interacting with officers, one of them noticed he had a gun sitting in the cup holder of his car. A cup holder, not tucked away, not locked in a case, sitting right there in plain sight, like a water bottle or a phone. Harden allegedly confirmed the gun was his, and that confirmation led directly to his arrest and booking. According to Harris County court records, a handgun was observed on the seat of the car Harden owns. The gun was not holstered and was in plain view. And here's the thing about Texas law. While it is legal to openly carry handguns in Texas without a permit, including in a car, those weapons must be in a holster at all times. That detail, the holster, is the entire case. One missing piece of equipment turned what would have been a perfectly legal situation into a misdemeanor charge. That's now following one of basketball's biggest names into the summer. Cleveland Cavaliers shooting guard James Harden was arrested in Harris County, Texas, and charged with misdemeanor unlawful carrying of weapons, according to court documents. The charge is not a felony, let's be clear about that, but the image it creates, the mugshot, the booking, the court date, lands differently. When you're talking about a man who just helped his team reach the Eastern Conference Finals, Harden was booked at 4:57 a.m. and later released after paying a $100 bond. $100 for a man who has earned somewhere north of $300 million in his NBA career. That bond might as well be a parking ticket. But the optics are anything but minor. According to the New York Post, Harden was at a hookah lounge in a large group before the arrest. So you've got a late night outing, a convoy of cars, a pre-dawn run-in with Houston police, and a weapon sitting unsecured in the front seat. That's a sequence of events that writes its own headline. In Harden's mugshot, which was provided to the press by the Houston Police Department, he could be seen wearing a black t-shirt and a stern look on his face. There's something about a mugshot that strips away everything. The Adidas deals, the highlight reels, the scoring titles. It flattens a person down to just a face, a booking number, and a charge. And Harden's face in that image is one that's hard to look away from, because you can see a man who knows exactly how bad this looks. Harris County records show Harden was released from jail on bond later Saturday morning and given an arraignment date, which was subsequently rescheduled. The legal machine was already starting to turn, and Harden wasn't navigating it alone. According to records, Harden hired high-powered Texas attorney Rusty Harden to represent him in the case. That's a deliberate, aggressive move. Harden has previously represented several famous professional athletes, including Deshaun Watson when the NFL quarterback was accused of sexual misconduct by multiple massage therapists. You don't hire Rusty Harden for a jaywalking ticket. You hire him when you need the best in the room. The Cavaliers, meanwhile, were scrambling. A spokesperson for Cleveland said the team was aware of the arrest and in the process of gathering more information, adding that they were in contact with James and his representation and would continue to monitor developments. That's the kind of careful corporate language that organizations use when they don't yet know how bad something is. Gather information first. Comment second. Protect the franchise in the meantime. And the NBA world didn't wait for the Cavaliers to get their statement together. Searches like, is James Harden in jail? James Harden arrested? And is James Harden going to jail exploded into breakout territory within hours of the news breaking. Every fan, every talking head, every sports Twitter account suddenly had a take, because this wasn't just a random athlete getting picked up for a minor charge. This was James Harden, a man whose career has been defined by controversy, drama, and the relentless feeling that something is always about to go sideways. Harden has no prior criminal record or arrest history. That's worth saying clearly. This isn't a man with a pattern of legal trouble. This is, by all public record, his first time on the wrong side of a booking sheet. But context is everything here, and the context around this arrest isn't just legal, it's personal. Harden, a 17-year NBA veteran, played 8 seasons, his peak seasons in Houston, and has close ties to the city. He spends much of his offseason there every year. So he wasn't some tourist passing through, he was home, his home. The city that made him, which makes the timing feel almost poetic in the worst way. Because the Houston that Harden returned to this summer isn't the same Houston that adored him when he was averaging 36 points a game and leading the Rockets to 65 wins. The Harden who walked into that police station in a black t-shirt isn't the Harden who made the whole league hold its breath. The version of Harden that got put in a booking photo is the result of half a decade of choices. On the court, off the court, in boardrooms, and on social media that have slowly reshaped the story of who James Harden actually is. Harden is potentially going to be a free agent at the end of the month with a $42 million player option decision he must make by June 29, of which only $13.3 million is guaranteed. It had been expected that Harden would opt out of the contract and sign a new multi-year deal to remain in Cleveland. So he was on the verge of the biggest financial decision of his recent career when this happened. A new deal, a new chapter, a team that actually went deep in the playoffs with him. And then a cup holder changed everything. The reaction from the sports world split almost instantly. Some people defaulted to defense. It's a misdemeanor. It'll be handled. Move on. Others took it as confirmation of everything they'd already decided about Harden, that the man is constitutionally incapable of avoiding chaos. Former teammates stayed quiet. Analysts weren't so restrained. The general vibe across sports media was somewhere between this is bad and this is so on brand. What was harder to ignore was the timing in relation to the Cavaliers' playoff run. Police noted the handgun was on the seat of Harden's car that was in plain view. Harden had helped lead Cleveland to its first Eastern Conference Finals since LeBron James left in 2018. But the Cavs were swept by the New York Knicks, so the team had just come off a disappointing sweep. Harden was back in Houston for the offseason, and within weeks there's a gun charge and a mugshot. That's a rough headline for any franchise trying to build around a veteran guard. Harden had averaged 19 2-points and 5 assists per game during Cleveland's playoff run. Those are solid numbers, not the otherworldly numbers from his Houston peak, but solid, contributory professional numbers. And yet the moment the season ended, it was like the off-court drama had been sitting in a waiting room, ready to walk back in. That's been the Harden paradox for the better part of 5 years. Whenever the basketball gets good, something else goes wrong. The legal reality of what Harden is facing is, in the cold light of day, manageable. He was charged with a misdemeanor count of unlawful carrying of a weapon, but he was released the same morning after posting bond. Misdemeanor charges of this type in Texas typically carry penalties that, for a first-time offender with strong legal representation, often result in fines, probation, or deferred adjudication. With Rusty Harden in his corner, the odds of Harden seeing the inside of a cell are slim. But slim and zero aren't the same thing, and even if the charge gets handled quietly, the mugshot is already out there. The image doesn't go away. It gets screenshotted. It gets used as a thumbnail. It gets attached to Harden's name. Every time someone searches for him on the internet, in the modern sports world where perception is currency, a mugshot is a tax that keeps collecting. Every time a team evaluates him, every time a sponsor revisits a deal, every time a fan argument starts up, that image is in the room. And so the question that the arrest raises is the same question that has been building for years now. Who exactly is James Harden in 2026, and where does he go from here? To answer that, you have to go all the way back to a different Houston, a different Harden, a man who once made the entire NBA look slow. There was a version of James Harden that made basketball feel unfair. Not unfair in the way that a physical freak of nature makes it unfair. Not a LeBron James, not a Shaquille O'Neal. This was a different kind of unfair. It was the mental kind. The kind where you're watching a guy operate in slow motion while everyone around him is sprinting. And somehow he's always a step ahead of where the play should be going. That was Houston-era Harden. And for a stretch of about 6 or 7 years, it was the most captivating show in the NBA. Harden was named 6th Man of the Year in 2011-12, helping the Oklahoma City Thunder reach the NBA Finals. Think about that for a second. He was the 6th man on a team with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, two of the most explosive players of their generation, and he was still good enough to win an award. That tells you what kind of talent was sitting on that bench. Quiet, coiled, waiting for its own stage. The stage came when Daryl Morey went and got him. Houston traded for Harden in October 2012, gave him a franchise and a spotlight, and he took both and ran. What followed was a 9-year stretch in Houston that produced numbers that most players never touch in their entire careers. Harden finally won the MVP award in the 2017-18 season, cementing his place as the league's best player. He led the Rockets to a franchise-best 65-17 record, the top seed in the Western Conference, while averaging 34 points and 8 assists per game. 65 wins in the Western Conference, with a roster built around his game. That's a number that stands up against anything in Rockets history. And he didn't just lead the team, he carried it. Harden was the league scoring champion, averaging 34 points per game, and was the fourth player to average at least 30 points and help lead his team to 65 wins, joining Stephen Curry, Michael Jordan twice, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That's the company he was in. Not just NBA royalty, NBA mythology. The kind that gets read at Hall of Fame speeches. And the records didn't stop at the MVP season. The following year, Harden put together one of the most remarkable scoring seasons in NBA history, averaging a career-high 36 points per game, the highest in the league. 36 points a game for a whole season. When the modern NBA is built around pace and efficiency and team-first basketball, one man was out there averaging 36 a night and making it look sustainable. The individual performances during that stretch were things you'd make up if you were writing a video game. Harden had one night where he scored 60 points along with 11 assists and 10 rebounds in a win over the Magic. A triple-double with 60 points. That stat line doesn't look real. It looks like someone forgot to put realistic limits on a player in a simulation. He also became the first man in league history to have at least 50 points, 15 rebounds, and 15 assists in a single NBA game. First in history. Not first among his peers, first among everyone who ever played the game. He became a 10-time NBA All-Star, a 3-time scoring champion, and a former MVP, known for his court vision, prolific scoring, and an outstanding offensive skill set. The step-back three became a signature move that defenses couldn't solve. The Euro step was a weapon. The way he drew fouls was an art form, controversial, sure, but undeniably effective. Harden's finish in MVP voting during his time in Houston ranged from 8th to 1st, including 2 runner-up finishes. And his MVP win in 2017-18, he was, for a real and measurable stretch of time, the best basketball player on the planet. Houston adored him. They called him the Beard. They packed the Toyota Center. They watched him break Rockets records that had stood since the Hakeem Olajuwon era, and treated each new performance like a gift being handed directly to the city. And for Harden, Houston wasn't just where he worked, it was where he lived. It was where he ate and where he went out, and where he built the off-court life that would later become its own separate story. The nightlife, the hookah lounges, the convoy of cars through downtown Houston at 3 in the morning. All of that has its roots in the identity he built during those Rockets years. But Houston also revealed the one thing that would follow Harden for the rest of his career: the playoffs. The Rockets were a regular season machine under Harden. The numbers were extraordinary. The wins were real. The MVP was deserved. But when June came around and the stakes were at their highest, something kept going wrong. The Rockets came within 1 game of reaching the NBA Finals, but were eliminated by the Golden State Warriors in a 7-game Western Conference Finals series. That Game 7 loss, the one where Houston missed 27 consecutive three-pointers, became one of the most painful moments in Rockets history, and Harden was at the center of it. The narrative around his playoff performance started to calcify. 1 bad series, you move on. 2, you notice a pattern. By the time Harden had a handful of early playoff exits and a series of inconsistent big-game performances, the conversation had shifted from when will he win a championship to can he win one. It was a reminder of what critics called Harden's propensity to disappear in a series' biggest moments, a criticism that has followed the veteran throughout his career. That's the kind of reputation that sticks. It seeps into how people talk about you, how they evaluate you, how they decide whether you're a winner or just a statistic. And then in January 2021, the Houston era ended. Not with a grand retirement, not with a championship, not even with a graceful exit. It ended the way a lot of Harden chapters would end, with Harden making it impossible for the team to keep him. Harden had broken pandemic rules, disrupted training camp, and shown up out of shape to force Houston to meet his trade demands. That's how an 8-year relationship between a player and a franchise dissolves. Not in a conversation, not in a press conference, but in a slow, deliberate campaign of unavailability and chaos. Harden wanted out, and he made staying so uncomfortable for everyone around him that the Rockets eventually blinked and traded him. The destination was the Brooklyn Nets, and for about 5 minutes, it looked like it might work. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, 3 of the most gifted offensive players the league had ever assembled, all on the same team, all theoretically capable of combining into something unstoppable. NBA Twitter lost its mind. Vegas moved the Nets to championship favorites almost overnight. The basketball world held its breath. And then it didn't work. Injuries, drama, Kyrie's refusal to get vaccinated, Durant's Achilles, Harden's hamstring, it unraveled fast and completely. Harden's heliocentric brand of basketball had fractured partnerships with all NBA stars. Dwight Howard, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving over the previous 6 years. That's 5 superstar-level players, 5 partnerships that started with promise and ended in friction. You can blame circumstances for 1 or 2 of those. By the time you get to 5, the common denominator starts to look a lot like the man himself. Harden's scoring average had decreased by 11 points per game since leaving Houston. That number alone tells a story. The game that made him legendary, the isolation scoring, the free throw drawing, the step-back threes, was starting to fade. The legs weren't quite as quick. The first step wasn't quite as automatic. And the body, which had been one of his greatest weapons through sheer conditioning and power, was starting to show the wear of over a decade of 35 minutes per game. Over a span of 2 years, Harden had effectively quit on the Nets and the Houston Rockets, reporting to both teams out of shape and forcing trades from each. That sentence from that period tells you everything about where the relationship between Harden and the league's front offices stood. He wasn't just a player with trade requests. He was a player who had developed a method: show up out of shape, make things uncomfortable, get moved. And the league was taking notes. The next stop was Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was where things got truly ugly. By the time James Harden arrived in Philadelphia, the league's perception of him had already shifted. He wasn't just a superstar with demanding tendencies anymore. He was a player with a documented pattern. Houston forced trade, Brooklyn forced trade, now Philly. And with each move, the leverage he had once wielded from a position of peak performance was eroding. Because the performance was eroding too. The Philadelphia 76ers needed a star to complement Joel Embiid. The Sixers were eventually able to grab Harden from the Brooklyn Nets in exchange for Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and draft picks. It was a massive haul to give up. Philly believed in what Harden could still be, a veteran playmaker next to an MVP caliber center, a combination that on paper looked like a genuine championship contender. And for a while, it was fine. Harden settled into a facilitator role, dropped his scoring average but pushed his assist numbers higher, and helped keep the Sixers competitive. He accumulated 10-6 assists per game with the 76ers, not the scoring machine of Houston, but useful, present, professional, until he wasn't. When Harden exercised his player option for the 2023-24 season on June 29, it came with a caveat: a trade request, the 3rd time he had requested a trade since leaving the Houston Rockets in January 2021. 3 trade requests in 3 years. 3 different organizations where Harden had decided at some point that things weren't working, and that leaving was the solution. The league had seen this movie before. They knew how it ended, but this time the Philadelphia drama had an extra layer. Because Harden didn't just request a trade quietly through his agent. He went to China, literally flew to China for an Adidas promotional event, and lit the entire situation on fire. From a press conference podium halfway around the world, Harden said publicly, "Daryl Morey is a liar, and I will never be a part of an organization that he's a part of." Then he repeated it for emphasis. Twice, in front of cameras, in front of reporters, in front of everyone. The internet had a field day. Clips of that press conference went everywhere. "Daryl Morey is a liar" became one of the most repeated phrases in sports that entire fall. It was the kind of public statement that you can't walk back. Not because the words were so outrageous, but because of the deliberateness of it. He didn't say it in a moment of heat. He said it in a staged media environment, with a microphone in front of him, and then said it again just to make sure everyone got it. The NBA fined Harden $100, zero for that statement. The Players Association challenged the fine, which showed Harden had backing from his peers. But the optics of the whole situation were telling a story that no legal challenge could fully undo. Here was a player, a former MVP, a decade-long franchise cornerstone, standing in front of foreign press, publicly calling out an executive, while still technically under contract with that executive's team. It was, by any standard, a remarkable breakdown. Harden had requested a trade from the Sixers, and the now 34-year-old had taken issue with Morey not promptly moving him to his preferred destination after opting into the final season of his deal. He publicly called the executive a liar and said he'd never be part of an organization with Morey ever again. What made it worse was the context. Morey was the same executive who had first brought Harden to Houston in 2012. The man who had built a franchise around him, the man who had handed him the keys to one of the NBA's storied franchises and watched him flourish into an MVP. And now they were airing grievances at an Adidas event in Beijing. Hall of Famer Reggie Miller described the situation as sad to see, noting that Harden and Morey had shared the same success. Harden had been an MVP in Houston under Morey's watch. That framing, sad to see, was about the most diplomatic way anyone put it. Less diplomatic voices were pointing out that the whole thing looked like a man burning a bridge he had already crossed safely, just for the satisfaction of watching it fall. Miller also expressed confusion at Harden, seemingly not wanting to play with reigning MVP Joel Embiid, asking if anyone had ever heard of a player not wanting to play alongside an MVP. That's the part that genuinely puzzled people who weren't already convinced that Harden had lost the plot. Embiid was the reigning MVP. He was the centerpiece of one of the league's most star-studded rosters, and Harden, who was supposed to be the perfect complement, the playmaker who freed up the big man, wanted out. Not because the basketball wasn't working, because of a contract dispute, because of a feeling of being disrespected. Harden had previously reneged on a deal with the Sixers, verbally agreeing to opt in to his player option when they acquired him from Brooklyn, only to change his mind after he arrived. So the Sixers had already been burned once. Morey had reason to be cautious, to move slowly, to not simply comply with every demand. And Harden's response to that caution was to escalate to full public war. It was the combination of that playoff history, his age, and additional criticism about his off-court behavior that left Harden with few suitors when the Clippers traded minimal draft capital to acquire him from Philadelphia. That detail, minimal draft capital, should have stung. This was a man who had been traded from Houston to Brooklyn for a package that included multiple first-round picks and 3 players. By the time Philadelphia moved him to the Clippers, the return was so modest it barely made news. The market for James Harden had quietly collapsed. At that time, Harden was begging off his third team in as many seasons, following a rift with executive Daryl Morey over a max contract he thought was owed to him. And nobody was offering him that max. That's the real gut punch of the Philadelphia chapter. Harden genuinely believed he was still worth maximum contract money, and the league collectively had decided he was not. That's a reckoning that very few elite players survive with their ego intact. Offering Harden anything close to his max salary would mean wildly overpaying. A one-time MVP in steep decline. That quote from a sports analysis piece around that era captures the shift exactly. One-time MVP in steep decline. This was a man who had been talked about in the same breath as LeBron and Durant and Curry, and now he was being described in terms of diminishing returns and overpayment risk. The fall from that kind of height is disorienting even to watch from the outside. So he landed in Los Angeles. And in LA, something unexpected happened. Nobody was offering Harden a max deal at that point, but the Clippers, with their deep pockets, granted him a 2-year, $70 million contract extension in the summer of 2024. $70 million. It was enough to confirm that the market, while no longer offering him the $200 plus million deals of his peak, still saw real value in what he brought. And Harden, for his part, actually delivered between the Clippers and Cavs last season. He averaged 22.5 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 8.7 assists on 35 plus minutes per game across 79 regular season games. Those are the numbers of a high-level starter, not an MVP, not a scoring champion, but a legitimate, useful, impactful basketball player who can still affect a game in multiple ways. The question was whether James Harden, a man who had spent so much of his recent career making things difficult for himself, could finally just let the basketball do the talking. For a while in Los Angeles, the answer was almost yes, but almost has always been Harden's most honest word. There's a version of the Harden decline story that's purely about basketball. Numbers going down, legs getting older, step back losing a little bit of its pop. That version of the story is real, and it matters. But there's another version that runs parallel to it. One that's about reputation, about relationships, about the off-court choices that quietly pile up until they become the whole story. The real Harden decline isn't just about what happened on the court. It's about what happened everywhere else. Harden's free throw attempts declined in 2 straight seasons. He took just 4.8 attempts per game in one recent season, contrasted with 2 attempts in 2021, 22 and 11.8 attempts in 2019-20. Free throws for Harden were always more than just points. They were a system. The ability to get to the line at will, through contact drawing, through pump fakes, through the kind of intelligent positioning that made referees blow their whistles, was the backbone of his scoring volume. When that went, a significant part of what made him elite went with it. His scoring average had decreased by 11.1 points per game since leaving Houston. 11 points. That's not a slump. That's not a bad stretch. That's a fundamental structural drop in what he's capable of producing night to night. Some of it is age. Some of it is that defenses figured out the step back and the foul drawing with enough film study. And some of it honestly is about the body. Harden had reported to both the Rockets and the Nets out of shape as part of forcing trades from each team. That's not just a contractual maneuver. That has physical consequences. When you spend the tail end of your prime conditioning cycle showing up to training camps unprepared, you're not just sending a message to the front office. You're doing real damage to the athletic foundation that your game is built on. Hamstring problems followed. Recovery took longer. The burst that had made him unstoppable started arriving on a slight delay. Harden was named the most overrated player in the NBA by a prominent analyst at Bleacher Report. Shuttling between the Rockets, Brooklyn Nets, Philadelphia 76ers, and LA Clippers, his numbers had declined across the board. That most overrated label is the kind of thing that a few years earlier would have been laughed out of the building. In his Houston prime, calling Harden overrated would have been sports media malpractice. By the time he reached the Clippers, it was a mainstream take that serious people were entertaining seriously. The off-court life had always been part of the story. Harden was never shy about being seen. The Houston years were full of documented nightlife, the kind that makes sense when you're 25 and playing the best basketball of your life, and maybe makes a different kind of sense when you're 36 and staring down a gun charge. He built an identity: the beard, the fashion, the restaurant appearances, the nightclubs. That was as much a brand as it was a lifestyle. And like all brands, it had a cost. The cost showed up in how teams evaluated him. The combination of his playoff history, his age, and criticism about his off-court behavior left Harden with few suitors. Front offices talk to each other. They share information. They know which players show up to training camp ready and which ones arrive as a project. By the mid-2020s, Harden's reputation in front office circles was carrying a surcharge, a hidden tax that teams had to factor in whenever they considered adding him to their roster. 3 trade requests in 3 years is not a coincidence. He had been disruptive, unavailable, and in increasingly poor shape during a span that included no fewer than 3 trade requests. Each of those requests reset the clock on his value. Each time he forced his way out of a city, the package coming back got smaller. By the time Philly moved him to the Clippers, the basketball world had quietly reached a consensus. Harden was someone you could work with, but working with him came with terms and conditions that weren't attached to other players of his caliber. And then there were the playoff performances. This is where the erosion became undeniable. and where the gap between who Harden was supposed to be and who he showed up as became impossible to ignore. He fell short in the playoffs, scoring only 7 points in a Game 7 loss to Denver. 7 points. In a Game 7, a game that ended a season, Harden had averaged over 22 a night in the regular season, and then produced 7 points when everything was on the line. That number, 7, became its own conversation piece, its own shorthand for the argument that Harden, for all his regular season brilliance, couldn't deliver when championships were being decided. The counter-argument is real and it's worth acknowledging. No player's legacy should be collapsed down to a single Game 7 number. Harden has produced in the playoffs before. He's had big series. He's carried teams deeper than they had any right to go. But patterns matter. In the NBA, and the pattern of Harden, plus high stakes equals something less than his best had repeated enough times to become part of how the sport officially discussed him, not as a rumor, not as a hot take, as a documented recurring thing. He helped lead Cleveland to its first Eastern Conference Finals since LeBron left in 2018. But the Cavs were swept by the New York Knicks. Swept. And in that sweep, Harden's numbers were fine but not commanding, the kind of performance that fuels the perception rather than challenges it. You need your best players to be at their best when the margin for error disappears. And Harden too often offers something a level below his ceiling at the precise moment the ceiling matters most. The brand, meanwhile, had taken its own hits. The nightlife stories never fully disappeared. The out-of-shape reporting during trade. Sagas left marks. The public war with Morey, the man who had given him his biggest platform, made Harden look like someone willing to burn relationships for short-term gain. And the cumulative weight of all of it, every trade request, every public statement, every showing up heavy for camp, had reshaped the public image, from one of the greatest scorers ever to something more complicated and less flattering. Shuttling between 4 different teams, his numbers had declined across the board. He was described as having been disruptive, unavailable, and in increasingly poor shape, when that's the public record. Not from anonymous sources, but from documented reporting and official records. It starts to define a player more powerfully than the scoring. Titles and MVP trophies do. People remember the chaos more vividly than the stats. So here's where we land before the arrest. A 36-year-old former MVP, still capable of producing at a solid level, still drawing a massive salary, but carrying enough baggage, legal, reputational, behavioral, that every chapter of his career now comes with an asterisk, and then he goes back to Houston for the summer and sits a gun in a cup holder, and suddenly all of it, every trade request, every bad playoff game, every public controversy, is sitting in that booking photo with him. The questions it raised were immediate. How does this affect his free agency decision? How does Cleveland look at this? Do sponsors start making calls? Does the NBA open an investigation? And underneath all of that, the bigger, quieter question, is this the beginning of the end, or just the latest detour in a career that has always had more detours than most? The thing about Harden's story is that it has always resisted clean endings. He should have won a championship in Houston. The team was good enough in 2018. He should have made the Brooklyn experiment work. The talent was there. He should have found a way to coexist with Morey and Embiid in Philadelphia. The basketball fit existed. At every junction where things could have gone right, something went sideways, and now, standing at the junction of a weapons charge and a free agency decision, and a career that is undeniably in its final chapter. The same thing is happening again. The pattern isn't broken, it's just louder now. As this arrest broke, Harden was potentially approaching free agency with a $42 million player option that only had $13.3 million guaranteed. It had been expected that Harden would opt out and sign a new multi-year deal to remain in Cleveland. That was the plan before the gun charge. A new deal, a new contract, a fresh start with a team that had actually gone deep in the postseason. Now that plan exists in a different context, one where every conversation between Harden's camp and Cleveland's front office has a news story attached to it. The Cavaliers said they were gathering information. That's the language of a franchise that doesn't yet know how to feel. The Cavaliers spokesperson said the team was in the process of gathering more information, which tells you they weren't ready to stand fully behind him, but they also weren't ready to cut ties. That's the Harden effect. He's valuable enough that you can't just walk away, and complicated enough that you can't just embrace him without hesitation. The contract math is interesting. Harden had a $42 million player option with the Cavaliers, but only $13.3 million of it was guaranteed. So opting in would mean betting on himself, that he'd be healthy, that he'd perform, that Cleveland wouldn't find a reason to manage the unguaranteed portion. Opting out would mean trusting that the market still values what he brings enough to offer him something better. Either way, a gun charge doesn't help the negotiation. And the market for Harden, even before the arrest, was specific. Reports had indicated that, one way or another, he was likely to re-sign with Cleveland on a new deal, which means the interest from the broader league wasn't necessarily deep. The Cavaliers were the destination, not one option among many. When your bargaining power depends on a single team's desire to keep you, a PR crisis is a complication you really don't need. The legal path forward for Harden is navigable. He hired high-powered Texas attorney Rusty Harden to represent him. Harden is one of the best defense attorneys in the country, particularly in Texas. For a first-time offender facing a misdemeanor charge, the typical outcomes run from deferred adjudication to a fine with no jail time. Harden was released on bond on the morning of his arrest and was free while his case proceeded. The court process will grind forward. There will be hearings. There will likely be a resolution. That doesn't involve prison, but it will take months, and every court date will generate a headline. The NBA could open its own review. The league has conduct policies that apply independent of criminal proceedings. A misdemeanor weapons charge doesn't automatically trigger a suspension. The NBA's process involves examining the specific facts of the case and making a determination. But the optics, again, are a factor. The league is in its off-season right now, which means Harden's situation will simmer in the news cycle without the relief valve of actual games being played. Every slow news day becomes another opportunity for someone to revisit the mugshot and the charge. There are people who will say this is the thing that finally ends it, that the arrest, combined with the age and the playoff failures and the string of trade dramas, represents the closing chapter of a career that has long since peaked. They'll argue that no serious contender brings in a 36-year-old guard with a weapons charge and a history of making himself inconvenient when things don't go his way. They'll say that Cleveland should cut their losses, that the market will move on, that Harden's story ends not with a championship or a retirement ceremony, but with a quiet fade out. Those people have a point. But they've had a point before, and Harden has kept playing. After Houston, people said he'd never find the same level of success. He went to Brooklyn and put up MVP-level numbers in his stretch there. After Brooklyn, people said he was finished as a primary option. He went to Philly and averaged double-digit assists. After Philly, people said no real contender would take a chance on him. He went to the Clippers, won an all-star selection, and helped Cleveland to the Eastern Conference Finals. Harden's career is built on outlasting the obituary. Every time someone writes the ending, he finds another chapter. The question isn't whether this arrest ends things. It probably won't in the strictly basketball sense. The question is what kind of chapter comes next, and whether the man writing it has learned anything from the ones that came before. He helped lead Cleveland to its first Eastern Conference Finals since LeBron left in 2018, and they were swept by the New York Knicks. That sweep is the most recent failure in a long line of playoff failures. And there's something in that sweep that matters more than the arrest, more than the gun charge, more than the mugshot. Because it tells you that even when Harden is functioning, even when he's playing at a solid professional level, the ceiling of what he brings to a championship chase is not quite high enough. The Cavaliers were swept. Harden's numbers in that series didn't spark a comeback. And now he's spending his summer dealing with a criminal charge instead of preparing for a redemption run. The reputation is the real sentence, not the legal one. Again, that'll likely be resolved with minimal consequence in a courtroom in Houston. The sentence that matters is the one that the NBA world has been quietly delivering for years. That James Harden is a player who will always leave you with a little less than you hoped for. Spectacular in stretches, frustrating in pivotal moments, loyal to his own comfort above all else. Capable of greatness, unwilling to fully sacrifice for it. Shuttling between the Rockets, Brooklyn Nets, 76ers, and Clippers, his numbers declined across the board. That trajectory, downward, team to team, always just enough to justify the next deal, but never quite enough to deliver the ultimate prize, is the defining arc of the second half of his career. And standing at 36 years old, with a gun charge and a pending contract decision and a mugshot circulating on the internet, it's hard to see where the trajectory bends back up. The goodbye in the title of this story isn't necessarily the courthouse. It might be quieter than that. It might be a contract negotiation where Cleveland offers less than expected. It might be another team opting not to pursue him. It might be a season where the minutes drop, the role shrinks, and the James Harden highlights that people share start being old ones instead of new ones. Careers don't always end with a bang. Sometimes they just stop being the main story. What's undeniable is this. The man who once scored 60 points and grabbed 11 assists in a single game, who led a franchise to 65 wins and won the MVP by consensus, who was for a real and undeniable period of time the most difficult player on earth to stop. That version of James Harden is gone. It's been gone for a while. What remains is still valuable, still productive, still capable of making an impact on a basketball game. But it is a diminished thing, and it carries the weight of every choice made since the Houston days ended. The gun in the cup holder on that Houston street at 3 a.m. is in a certain light a perfect metaphor for the whole second act of Harden's career. The law in Texas says you can carry the weapon. It says you can have it right there in the car with you. It just has to be in a holster. The rules were clear. The capability was there. And still somehow the one detail that would have kept everything clean got overlooked. And now there's a mugshot, a charge, a court date, and a conversation happening across every sports desk in America about whether James Harden's story is finally actually winding down. Harden had averaged 19 2 points and 5 assists per game during Cleveland's playoff run. Those numbers exist. They're real. They say this man can still play. He's not done. He hasn't been exposed as some shell of a player who can't contribute. He's a professional operating at a professional level, and at 36, that deserves some credit. But here's the thing about being a Hall of Fame player. The bar isn't still contributing. The bar is legacy, and Harden's legacy, as it currently stands, is one of the most debated in recent NBA history. An MVP who never won a championship, a scorer without peer who couldn't find his best game in the biggest moments. A player who changed the sport, genuinely. The way the game is played shifted because of what Harden could do. With a step back and a pump fake, but who left every place he went with a little fire burning behind him. That legacy isn't finished being written, but the chapters are getting shorter now, and the ones that are left don't have the same space for the kind of redemption story that changes everything. Harden had been traded from the Clippers to Cleveland in the middle of the season and was expected to sign an extension with the Cavaliers this offseason. Whether that extension still happens, on what terms, at what value, with what kind of commitment from both sides, is now the most pressing question in the Harden story. Not the gun charge, not the court date, the contract. Because if Cleveland walks away or significantly devalues the offer, that's the real signal. That's the moment the league collectively decides that the risk-reward calculation on James Harden has finally tipped too far in the wrong direction. Not because of a misdemeanor charge. Misdemeanors don't end careers, but because of everything the misdemeanor represents. A 36-year-old player with a complicated history, a declining physical profile, a string of playoff disappointments, and a documented ability to make things difficult for the people around him. The mugshot that circulated across the internet this week isn't a verdict. It's not a sentence. It's not a career ender in any technical or legal sense, but it is a moment. One of those moments that lands in a specific way at a specific time, when a player is at a certain age, with a certain reputation, making a certain set of decisions, and crystallizes the conversation that people have been having quietly for years. James Harden has always been one of the most fascinating, infuriating, spectacular, and self-defeating players in the history of the NBA. The talent was real. The peak was real. The numbers are in the record books and they don't lie. But the endings, Houston, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, and now whatever comes after Cleveland, have all carried the same flavor. The feeling that something that could have been permanent got treated like it was temporary. that something great got restless and left before it was done. The question of whether this is goodbye forever depends on how you define goodbye. The uniform might stay on for another season, maybe two. The court process will resolve without a prison sentence. The contract will get negotiated. Numbers will get exchanged. A deal will probably get done. The basketball will continue in some form for at least a little while longer. But the version of James Harden that people truly believed in, the one who was going to win a championship and cement himself as one of the all-time greats without an asterisk, that version said goodbye a long time ago. It said goodbye in a Game 7 against the Warriors. It said goodbye when he reported out of shape to force a trade for the first time, and then a second, and then a third. It said goodbye in a press conference in China, and it made a quiet appearance in a Houston police station at 3:41 in the morning, wearing a black t-shirt, staring into a camera for a mugshot that now belongs to the permanent record of one of basketball's most complicated careers. What happens next is what it's always been for Harden. Another chapter that starts with potential and ends with questions. And the rest of us watch the same way we always have, half expecting the comeback story and half bracing for the next detour. Because with James Harden,